Oregon faces a dire shortage of public defenders. The staffing crisis has led to a backlog in the court system and dozens of criminal cases being dismissed.
This is incredibly stressful and worrying for victims who don't know whether the case against a person is going to be dismissed.
And hundreds of people accused of crimes wait in custody for an attorney to represent them.
So at least if that person has been detained pretrial, they're sitting in jail without having their case adjudicated.
Now, Oregon's Chief Justice has fired the entire commission charged with overseeing this public defender crisis. And what will it take for downtown Portland to recover from the effects of the pandemic? Some researchers say it's time to think about a new downtown.
Beef up your arts and entertainment sectors. Tourism is bringing back a number of different cities.
Here's the story. And hey there, I'm Ashley Korslund in for Pat Doris tonight. Welcome to The Story. I want to start with a question. When was the last time you came into downtown Portland, and why did you come? Was it maybe to see a festival or catch a show? If so, you probably saw a lot of people downtown. This summer's festivals and events have, for the most part, had a pretty good attendance. Or are you one of the people still working downtown? If you worked here before the pandemic, you know how different it is now. Public transit, parking, coffee shops, and lunch spots all used to be a lot more crowded than they are now. The issues facing downtown Portland, homelessness, crime, trash, they all existed before the pandemic, but the pandemic really amplified them. And it's not just Portland's downtown that struggled. Downtown areas in lots of big cities around the country have had the same types of problems over the last few years. We feel like we hear the same stories and the same complaints coming from cities like Seattle or Denver. But some of them are recovering better than others. And a new study shows that almost every city is recovering better than Portland. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, looked at cell phone data, how many phones were pinging in what areas, and how they were moving around to see how many people are visiting downtown this year compared with 2019. And Portland came in, get this, 60th place out of 62 cities. The only cities that scored worse were Cleveland, Ohio, and San Francisco. Now, according to the data, Portland has only reached about 41% recovery. The top cities, by the way, were Salt Lake City, Bakersfield, California, and Columbus, Ohio. All of their downtowns are actually doing better than they were before the pandemic. We talked with one of the researchers on this study.
It's super interesting to see which ones bounced back and which ones did not. So Portland, sadly, is near the bottom. San Francisco is actually at the very bottom. And so there's a number of cities that haven't even recovered as half as much of the activity as they had 3 years ago. So what's going on in these places? Well, we did some models to kind of figure out, using regression models and statistical correlations, to figure out what factors matter most. And it turns out the number one factor that I think it's hurting places like Portland and San Francisco is the economy. I like to say it's the economy, stupid, the famous saying, because both Portland and San Francisco have gotten overly concentrated in just a couple of sectors. And the most vulnerable sector to have in your downtown economy is professional services.
Yeah, so did you catch that? The researchers say the biggest reason downtown Portland isn't recovering is because we've lost so much of the big crowds of people who used to work there.
Small offices of professionals are the ones that have chosen to work from home. Many of the bigger offices, companies have cracked down, said you have to come in 2 or 3 times a week. But lawyers working by themselves, or accountants, or people working in office with just 3 or 4 people, they've really chosen to work from home now, perhaps permanently. So that's really hurting these economies. And
well, we've heard a lot from businesses over the past 2 years who say they are done with downtown Portland. They are packing up and literally leaving. Just last week, the Oregonian reported that Unitas Community Credit Union is moving its headquarters from Southwest 6th Avenue downtown out to Tigard, and nearly 180 employees are going with. They say they're moving to a hybrid model of work, and they just don't need as much space as their downtown location offered. And moving to the suburbs will be an easier commute for their workers who are coming into the office. The Portland Business Journal reported last week that downtown Portland offices now have a 26% vacancy rate. We've heard from many businesses who say they're leaving because of crime or issues with the homeless population, or simply because the suburbs gave them a better deal. And lots of businesses are closing down their offices altogether because their workers are remote and they just don't need the physical space anymore. Even Portland's city employees, thousands of people who used to commute to downtown every day, are only back in their offices maybe 1 or 2 days a week. So where does downtown Portland go from here? Well, some companies are trying to get workers to come back to the office, but it's not likely to get back to the way it was before. For a lot of people, remote work just makes more sense for a lot of reasons. Some surveys suggest that the shift to remote work will be permanent for up to half of the workforce in major cities, especially large congested areas that also have a lot of tech jobs. The researchers say it's time to start thinking about a new downtown or using downtown areas differently.
What they could do if they wanted to do better, if they wanted to look like San Diego, for instance, or New York even, which is back at 78% of pre-pandemic levels, beef up your arts and entertainment sectors. Tourism is bringing back a number of different cities. And then having more residential downtown, of course, is another way to get more people back.
Now, like I mentioned, we're already seeing this in Portland. People are still willing to come downtown for a show or a festival. Lots of them are. So what do you think? How would you like to see downtown Portland transform in the coming years? All the ways to get in touch with us are at the bottom of your screen. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. Use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW on Twitter, or leave us a voicemail. You can call us at 503-226-5090. All right, now let's get to our big story tonight. The state of Oregon has only 31% of the public defenders it needs. That's according to the American Bar Association. Simply put, our public defense system is overworked and understaffed, and cases can't be heard unless a defendant has an attorney. As of mid-May, about 500 defendants across the state were left without legal representation from a public defender. And this spring, a group of those defendants even filed a lawsuit alleging the state violated their constitutional right to legal counsel and a speedy trial. And this doesn't just have ramifications for those who are accused of crimes, but also for the victims who are waiting for justice or fear their case will be dismissed entirely and a suspect released from custody. So what can be done to fix this public defender staffing crisis? Well, we talked with Caroline Davidson, a law professor at Willamette University. One glaring issue she sees is that Oregon uses a fee-for-case system. So the state doesn't have a public defender's office. Instead, attorneys from public defense firms are contracted to represent defendants. They get paid a fee for each case they take, regardless of the outcome, which might not always be in the best interest of their defendant, their client. Davidson would like to see the state move away from this model.
You have a right to be represented by somebody who doesn't have a conflict of interest. And you have a right to be represented by somebody who's going to zealously advocate for your rights and zealously advocate you in the criminal case that the state is mounting against you. And the problem with the sort of fee for case system in Oregon is that a person who has a contract with the state has an incentive to do as little as possible on the case. Because their financial incentive is to get as many cases as possible, to do as little as possible on those cases, and therefore make as much money as possible. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that that's true of every attorney in one of those arrangements. I'm confident that there are some wonderful attorneys who are zealously advocating for their clients, despite the fact that it is not in their financial interest to do so. But as a systemic issue, that's a bad way to set up the system, right? You shouldn't be setting up the system in a way that disincentivizes zealous advocacy on the part of people defending folks accused of crimes.
And you mean they get paid the same rate, whether they take the case all the way to trial or strike a plea deal right off the bat? They get the same pay no matter what happens with the case.
That is exactly what I mean. Yes. Yes. Now, that's not the only arrangement in Oregon, but it's the predominant arrangement. That is the predominant arrangement for trial level cases in Oregon. And that is a real problem.
So another issue Davidson brings up is that oftentimes public defenders make far less money than attorneys who work, for example, in prosecution, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars a year less. She says that pay gap has to be narrowed in order to attract more defense attorneys.
It is every bit as onerous a job, if not more onerous. It is a tough job, and people should be compensated in a way that attracts candidates. So you need to compensate people in a way that they can pay their law school debts, and they can have a family, and they can afford to live where they're living. So there's a real problem in not compensating adequately people, that you not only have trouble attracting them in the first place, but you have trouble retaining them.
This whole issue came to a head this week when Oregon's Chief Justice Martha Walters fired all 9 members of the state's Public Defense Commission that oversees the state's public defense system. Just a couple hours ago, we found out the Chief Justice gave 5 of those members their seats back and appointed 4 new members to round out the commission. If you'd like to learn more about what led to this dramatic change, we think this article from OPB is worth your time. It explains in detail the internal turmoil between Steve Singer, the executive director of the Public Defense Services Office, and some former members of the commission. Critics tell OPB that Singer hasn't moved fast enough to fix the state's public defender crisis and is, quote, incredibly hard to work with. Later this week, the commission will meet to review and evaluate Singer's job performance. You can check out opb.org to read this article, or go to our Twitter feed right now for the link. Let's return now to talk about some livability issues in Portland. At the top of the show, we told you about downtown Portland's struggle to recover, but we all know of other areas of Portland that are struggling too. A long stretch of beach on Hayden Island has been a dumping ground for campers and a spot where many derelict boats have sunk or illegally pull up and they stay there. It's hurting the environment, both on the land and the river. As Catherine Cook reports, a temporary ban on the camping there has been helping, and the state hopes to make it permanent.
On the north bank of Hayden Island, just west of the I-5 bridge, is this 500-yard stretch of Columbia Riverbank. It's somewhat of an anomaly in that the only legal way the public can access it is from the water, say by kayak. But lately, state land officials say there's been a lot more illegal activity here than water sports.
We want the public to be able to pull up from the waterway and use and enjoy the banks over there.
Leanne O'Neill is communications officer with the Department of State Lands. It oversees use of state-owned waterways, including the Columbia.
Our hope is to ensure that we can reduce impacts on the waterway.
For that reason, they're exploring a permanent rule that would ban fires and camping along this stretch between River Mile 106 and 107. The move comes after multiple complaints from law enforcement, emergency responders, and the Portland Harbor Master about illegal activity impacting the health and safety of the waterways.
In May, the state approved a 6-month emergency restriction banning overnight use, camping, and campfires. It's a short-term solution to all of the litter, including drug paraphernalia and dozens of abandoned shopping carts. There have also been an increase in complaints over threats of violence and uncontrolled fires. And of course, there's the environmental impact.
Some of the environmental impacts that we consider are erosion. When you're having things that are going into the waterway that introduces more sediment. We're also thinking about contaminants entering the waterway.
Hayden Island is struggling in other areas too. Last week, about a quarter mile from here, this Cracker Barrel restaurant abruptly closed its doors for good. Employees told KGW the restaurant's management called an emergency meeting to announce the closure, telling staff it was due to security issues. Regulars were not surprised, pointing to more drug-related garbage and litter in the area.
Gross. That's the best way to describe it. There's a lot of theft, people on drugs.
Back at this riverbank, land officials say the temporary fix has made things better.
It has helped to reduce those impacts on the waterway. And for this reason, we're looking at enacting permanent rulemaking.
Catherine Cook, KGW News.
We're going to be doing a lot more with these issues, specifically with derelict boats and camping on the rivers in our area. If you have some insight on areas affected or have thoughts on this, you can shoot us an email. Again, that address is thestory@kgw.com. Well, some of the people who are camping outside say they do want permanent housing, but it can be sometimes hard to get. A woman living along Northeast 33rd and Marine Drive sent us an email after seeing a story we did last week about the people living there. She told us that she's been trying to get off the streets and into housing, and that she's been on a wait list for a Section 8 housing voucher for years, only to run into issues when it comes to meeting some of the requirements. So we took her questions to Home Forward, the housing authority that manages local Section 8 vouchers. Blair Best has the story.
Hey, Cliff! I need your help!
She's lost in the chaos.
When I don't have gas in my generator, I sleep in my car. Because of the rats. Hey, Cliff, we need to push this car over there.
Stuck on the streets.
Whoa!
And pushing to get out.
Okay, go forward. It's like 2 weeks from now.
Time has never been on Tara Pietromonico's side. For the past 3 years, she's been living on this section of Northeast 33rd Drive.
I've just been having a hard time getting back up on my feet again.
This lifestyle wasn't her choice. It's something she fell into after leaving prison, where she spent time for identity theft.
I got out to no more. They took my business, they took my houses, they took my cars, they took everything. My husband left, my kids didn't want to talk to me, so I kind of got thrown out here.
She also faces another burden.
I was addicted to meth, but I wasn't addicted to it. It was just something to do because I was bored. I got out of prison. I was like, I ain't got anything to lose.
She lives off Social Security, which is about $800 a month. She has $2,000 saved for a home and has been trying to get a Section 8 housing voucher.
It's the money. It's the rent raises and the felonies on my record make me look like I'm a bad person.
Tara tells us that she's been on the wait list for a Section 8 housing voucher for 3 years, and she finally made it to the top, only to find out that she needs a proof of residency.
Obviously, I'm needing help, and the Section 8 was supposed to help me get back on my feet again. And what they did is they degraded me by telling me I can't have it because I'm not paying rent anywhere.
Those at Home Forward, the housing authority that manages local Section 8 housing vouchers, weren't able to talk with us on camera, but tell us the barriers for getting on the voucher wait list are low. And all Tara would need is someone to write a letter verifying she lives in Portland so she can get her spot back on the list, which is not such an easy task for people with barriers like Tara.
Charlie! You know, if we had some resources coming down the street and talking to us right now, everybody's just giving up. Everybody's just like, there ain't nobody out there to help us.
In Northeast Portland, Blair Best, KGW News.
The signatures are in, and Betsy Johnson says she has more than enough to get her name on the ballot to run for Oregon's governor this fall.
This is a historic day, and what it proves is that you don't have to join a party or change parties.
What the other two women running for governor say about their opponent when the story returns. Hey, welcome back. Keep sending your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com or give us a call and leave a voicemail at 503-226-5090. Okay, we are a big step closer to officially seeing 3 women on the ballot for Oregon's governor this fall. Today, Betsy Johnson dropped off signatures right to the Secretary of State's office. She needed just under 24,000 to qualify for the general election for the ballot, and she said she got twice that. Christine Pitawanich was there as Johnson turned them in.
Here at the state capitol in Salem, Betsy Johnson submitted thousands of signatures to the Secretary of State's office, hoping to cement her spot in the governor's race.
Let's go inside and make some history for Oregon.
That's Betsy Johnson on the steps of the Public Service Building in Salem, and these are her 17 boxes, hand-delivered and filled with signatures.
And we ended up with the signatures that we need to easily qualify for the ballot.
Johnson's campaign says these boxes contained 48,214 signatures, well over the 23,744 needed to qualify for the November ballot.
This is a historic day, and what it proves is that you don't have to join a party or change parties to put Oregonians back in charge. You just want a better Oregon.
Johnson is running as an unaffiliated candidate after serving for decades as a Democrat in the Oregon legislature. Her opponents weighed in on her politics. Christine Drazen is running as a Republican. Her campaign put out a statement calling Johnson a Democrat, saying in part, "It looks all but certain that Oregonians will see 2 Democrats on their ballots this November, Tina Kotek and Betsy Johnson. Oregonians, if you are happy with the way things are going in our state, then you have 2 great choices in these candidates." Meantime, in a Zoom video chat with Tina Kotek.
Here's the situation. Senator Johnson is very conservative, and I think very much in line with the Republican in our race, Christine Drazen. I have fought for gun safety legislation that keeps our community safe. They have voted against it. There's a clear contrast in this race, and really there are 2 conservatives in the race, and then there's me.
Thank you. Back at the Secretary of State's office, Johnson was all smiles, saying the day was all about submitting the signatures she needs to get on the November ballot.
I'm obviously excited about it. We're pleased to be here.
People with Betsy Johnson's campaign say now all that's left is for the Secretary of State's office to count and verify signatures, which it has to do by August 30th. In Salem, Christine Pitawanich, KGW News.
Still ahead here on The Story, we are checking in with Titan Van Coog. It is the giant rare corpse flower living at Washington State University in Vancouver, and it is getting ready to show all of us how stinky it can really get when we come back. Okay, any minute now, there is going to be a horrible, rancid smell on the Washington State University campus in Vancouver. And you can go smell it for yourself if you're into that sort of thing. So it's a giant corpse flower called Titan Vancouver, and it's growing at the WSU Vancouver campus. It is about to bloom for only the second time. By the way, it gets the name corpse flower because, as you might have guessed, it smells like rotting flesh when it blooms. The flower takes years to bloom too. A professor of molecular biosciences started growing it in a pot on his desk 20 years ago. In 2019, it bloomed for the first time. The plant is also incredibly rare.
There's only about 1,000 believed to be alive in the world, and it's endangered in its native habitat. So we're trying to increase the genetic diversity. We've got pollen from 3 sources to pollinate this plant and try to keep the plant alive so that hopefully in some time in history when it's hospitable in its native Sumatra, we can put it back home.
Now the flower is more than 7 feet tall. Scientists had to move it outside this week because it was getting too tall to go through the doors. But it's also incredibly fragile and it doesn't handle changes to its climate well. So they had to get creative when it came to moving it.
So I stewed and stewed about this, and then it hit me. Cross-country skis. They turned out to be just about the right height and they bent in at the top. Plus, they had a little flexibility. I did not want something that was rigid. And then I put in some air pillows to cushion it, and it moved okay. And maybe this is more than necessary, but I just wanted to make sure it didn't snap off.
That was genius. Hey, whatever it takes, right? Okay, if you want to go check this out, we will let you know when the corpse flower blooms. It could happen any day now, but it will be soon, we promise. The professor says the scent is strongest in the first 24 hours. Okay, keep sending your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com. We will finish the show right after this. Well, our Hey Help campaign for the next couple of weeks is the KGW School Supply Drive. We are trying to raise enough money and supplies for more than 15,000 kids. And one of the best and easiest ways that you can help is to give online. You can do it right now. Just grab your phone, aim your camera right at this QR code, and then you can donate right on our website. There's also a list of collection partners in your area that you can give to in person. If you don't have your phone right now, just remember this web address, kgw.com/school. Well, that's the end of our show. Thank you so much for watching, but don't go away. The news at 6:30 with David.